Hosting this show 6 p.m. Eastern time when much of the news of the day is typically over, I know it looks effortless. I know I'm like the Nancy Kerrigan of hosts. I make it just look so easy. And then somebody comes along and tries to break my legs with a bat. Uh, this week, these two stories, the Epstein story, which really is exceeding any rational person's understanding of how it's taken over Washington and other parts of the country, maybe. This Epstein story and this Tulsi Gabbard story, which we'll talk about tonight with our guests. I mean, as many of you know, I've been doing this for a while. I don't get these two stories. Normally, when they're big stories, legislation or political or tariffs, even the Ukraine-Russia war, like I feel I have my arms around the facts. I feel like I can anticipate where they might go. I don't have any understanding of these two stories. And you might say, well, Mark, why should we spend an hour with you just to hear you say you don't understand? Well, tonight we have two extraordinary guests, and I'm guessing that they've got the whole thing figured out. One Republican, one Democrat, Republican Elizabeth Pipko, and Steven Olikara, who's been here before. They're listening now, I think, and just warn you both, I'm not going to be able to explain anything. I'm just going to tee stuff up, and you guys are going to be like who would be good? You'd be like Socrates and Nancy Drew. I don't know, but please be ready to explain it all because I don't have it. Lots going on in the Epstein story, and this audience is mixed on Epstein. Some of you think the whole hour should be about Epstein, and this is the story of the century. And some of you send me delicious messages saying, "Don't talk about it anymore." And then the Tulsi Gabbard thing, that the head of national intelligence was in a White House briefing room today, standing with Caroline Leavitt, and she said a bunch of extraordinary things, some of which are being covered in the mainstream dominant media, and some are not, including some things about Hillary Clinton that are quite something. So we'll run through that. There are other stories, a few other stories. Mike Waltz's nomination to be the UN ambassador is stalled thanks to Rand Paul. Roy Cooper may run for the Senate in North Carolina. The Supreme Court gave the president another favorable ruling. But most of what we're going to talk about has to do with these two stories, which may or may not be related. And our guests are going to hopefully be able to say if they are related. After we bat things around a bit, it'll be time for your participation. It's an honor and a privilege to be part of the two-way community for me. And I hope you feel the same way with peace, love, and understanding overwhelming your capacity to type smack in the chat if you're on YouTube or X, and if you're here on the two-way platform, would love your participation. Every day I don't read the chat, but I do see who shows up, and there are a lot of new people here today. Don't know what drew you here, but if you're new and you don't know the rules, Alan could tell you the rules. Just raise your electronic hand. There'll be a yellow thing hovering over you like a guardian angel, not a Curtis Sliwa type guardian angel, just regular. If you want to ask a question and be on the conversation for our great guest, please raise your hand and we'll get to you before too long. There's just a ton of video to play for you and headlines to show you. It's going to be an incredible program. So buckle in. It's going to be a wild ride. And again, our guests will be here in just a moment. I'm going to let's take a little break for what the British would call an advert. All right, we're going to do an advertisement. Our sponsor tonight is Indeed. All right, if you're hiring, hiring quickly, essential. They say you got to hire quickly because these unfilled jobs just, again, I deal with hiring, and it's just like, if you've got empty jobs that need to be filled, it can bring the whole business to a standstill. So don't let that happen. If you're hiring, all you need is Indeed. You stop struggling to get the jobs filled because it's just a waste of your time. Indeed has sponsored jobs that help you stand out and hire quickly. With sponsored jobs, you post the job, it jumps to the top of the page, and you can reach the people you need to reach faster. It makes a huge difference. Indeed's data shows sponsored job posts directly on Indeed have a 45% capacity to get 45% more applicants when you do it that way compared to the non-sponsored jobs. So don't wait any longer. Speed your hiring right now with Indeed. Listeners of this program, listen closely, listeners of this program. you are listeners or viewers, if you're watching on YouTube, special offer for you. You get $75 off a job credit for the sponsored job listing, get you more visibility. So go to Indeed.com right now, /2way, Indeed.com/2way. You do that, you'll see the opportunity to get $75 off. Again, go to Indeed.com/2way right now. Support this program because the people at Indeed, they got metrics. They know exactly what we're doing. So if you go on there and you put in Indeed.com/2way, you'll help us out. So do that, please. Support our show by saying you heard about it on this program. Indeed.com/2way. Terms and conditions apply, because they always do. It's true on Indeed.com. It's true in life. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring Indeed is all you need. All right. Again, two big stories that I don't get, but our guests do, because our guests, unlike me, are clear thinkers. Clear thinkers. Returning to the program. And when we had them on the first time, the reaction was so overwhelmingly positive. I said right away to my colleague, Lori Blackford, Steven's going to come back. I can tell you that we want him back. And Steven, how was the experience? You get any feedback when you were on the first time?
I did. It was very positive from people on the coasts, people in the Midwest. I think I saw a comment on X saying a star is born. So if my star was born on two-way, I'll take that.
There
And I'm very
was,
happy to be
there
back.
was. Someone did tweet that, and I retweet it, and I think I gave it a thumbs up, or that 100 thing that you kids use. Stephen, remind people who don't know what you do for a living, and what kind of Democratic Party politics you practice.
Yes, well, I consider myself a independent-minded populist, progressive, in the tradition of fighting Bob LaFollette, the former U.S. Senator from my home state of Wisconsin. And I work at the intersection of culture change and political reform, run an organization called Bridge Entertainment Labs, and formerly ran for the U.S. Senate in Wisconsin.
All right, welcome back. Elizabeth, first time here. Pipko, please unmute if you would. Elizabeth, you ever been at the intersection of popular culture and politics? It's right down the street from where Stephen lives. You ever been there?
Every day of my life, of
Every
course.
day. Elizabeth, welcome. Grateful to you as well,
Thanks.
Stephen, for being here. Where did you grow up? Stephen's from Wisconsin, the Badger State. Where are you from?
I'm from Manhattan, New York. So I grew up in the center of the city that we might even talk about today, that everyone's
Yeah.
talking about.
Center. So you grew up in Manhattan. Did you go to school in Manhattan?
I did. I went to a private Orthodox Jewish day school from the age of 2 years old in the center of Manhattan.
That's incredible. And do you keep kosher?
I do keep kosher.
Yeah.
You're the first person who's asked me that.
Really? You ever been to Reserve? Is it called Reserve Cut?
It is called Reserve Cut, yes.
Have you been to that place?
Many times, yes.
I'm going there tonight. I have to tell you, folks, this is not a travel show, but since Manhattan was raised, it's the best steak I've ever had in the United States.
Oh, wow.
It's phenomenal. So I
Okay,
recommend
good.
if you're here. Stephen, you don't keep kosher.
I don't, but I will
Yeah.
be in New York City next week.
All right, I recommend Reserve
welcome your
Cut.
recommendations.
Stephen, would you ever wash down a big steak with a glass of milk? Would you ever do that?
I probably wouldn't, but I'm sure many people do.
All right, Elizabeth, I got to ask you one more question about keeping kosher, because this came up the other night. If you have a steak dinner, you can't have ice cream for dessert unless you wait 2 hours, right?
It depends who you ask. Technically,
Yeah.
you should be waiting 6 hours, but I know
6
some people
hours.
who wait 3.
I like to take a little break between the entree and dessert, but 6 hours seems like a lot.
Yeah, if you're going to a Reserve Cut, you're going to be
Yeah.
served like a parve, we call it,
Yeah,
dessert, which
yeah.
means non-dairy, which usually
Yeah.
is not great. I will say
Yeah,
that.
yeah. All right, maybe some fruit. All right, Elizabeth, tell folks, I know a lot of people who know you, and it's very nice to talk to you. Tell folks your, like, the trajectory of your career. You've done other things besides politics, but tell people about your involvement in politics, including with Trump World.
Yeah, so I basically accidentally got involved in the Trump campaign in 2016 as a volunteer. Then I ended up as one of their youngest staffers on that campaign. We obviously won. I've been in and out of Trump World since that win, but in 2016 I was on the campaign. In 2020 I ran a super PAC and then did some media commentary. And then for the 24 election, I was the national spokesperson for the Republican Party. So I would definitely consider myself more MAGA than Republican, if that makes sense to a lot of people, because the only involvement I've had, and probably the only involvement I'll ever have in Republican politics, will do with Donald Trump and has been with Donald Trump.
Okay, let me ask you this question. From Ronald Reagan on, not counting President Reagan and not counting President Trump, who's the best president of the United States in your view in that run between Bush 41 and Biden, besides Trump? Who's the best?
Probably Bill Clinton.
How come?
I mean, I think America probably was at its best at that point. I think he was one of the most brilliant politicians, even though I to this day disagree with him on a lot, one of the most brilliant politicians we've ever had. And I think someone who knew the job that he was going into before he got there and knew how to do it. Whereas most people before and after him either seem to be surprised when they get there or not know what to do when they arrive there. But I would say there's a reason he's still as popular as he is, for sure, despite everything that he brought to our country and faced himself.
Super interesting. Thank you for that. All right. There's a gimmick we've been doing lately. You guys may not have seen an episode where we did this. When there are two big stories and I can't decide which to lead with, I let the guests decide. But I do it like this. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and vote. So you can't see who the other one's voting for. And we'll see. Hopefully you got the same one. So both close your eyes. We're either going to talk about Epstein and all the developments of Epstein, or we're going to talk about Tulsi Gabbard's extraordinary press conference today. So close your eyes. Elizabeth, don't peek. I'm never playing Marco Polo with you with that kind of attitude. Raise your hand if you want to start with Epstein. Raise your hand if you want to start with Epstein. Okay. And raise your hand if you want to start with Tulsi Gabbard. All right. Two great Americans agree. We're going Gabbard. Thank you very much. All right. So as everybody knows, the Director of National Intelligence has been putting out different things about her view of what happened in the Obama administration in connection to President Trump and allegations related to Russia and the 2016 campaign. First, she put out a few statements of her own. Then this morning, she put out a declassified report that had been written by, what's the guy's name? What's that former congressman's name? Somebody help me. Devin Nunes, thank you. Myself, I thought of it myself. And then today, extraordinary turn at the White House podium. I could try to summarize this, but I'll tell you, I've said this every episode since we talked about this. I really don't quite understand what she's saying and what the charges are. And people say, well, have on smarter guests. Well, I have two geniuses who are going to explain it in a moment. But here is, we're going to just play a bunch of it. Here is, well, here's number 6, Wall Street Journal headline. This is pretty typical. White House and Gabbard ramp up attacks on President Obama. There you go. Over alleged Russia conspiracy. Tulsi Gabbard disputes findings that Russia interfered in the 2016 election to help Trump, which previous elections have concluded. Again, most of the reports, including one by the Senate Intelligence Committee that was bipartisan, up until now, it's been accepted that Russia wanted to help President Trump win the election. No indication that there was collusion, although there was contact. Tulsi Gabbard's disputing that. So here is Tulsi Gabbard claiming that, in fact, Russia wanted to help Hillary Clinton win. Number 7, please.
We understand from intelligence what Russia said that they had. And the important point here is that if they were trying to influence the election, as President Obama and James Clapper and John Brennan, everybody said they were doing in order to support Donald Trump's election, they would have released the most damning of that information, some of which I detailed here. You'll find the rest in the report, prior to the election to help Donald Trump win. They specifically withheld what they had on her, the most damning information, because they thought that she would win the election. They had plans to release it just prior to her inauguration to, again, sow discord and chaos in America.
So if you know the history between Tulsi Gabbard and Secretary Clinton, they've not always said the nicest things about each other. So that's the predicate for where we are now. Just a little breaking news here. The Justice Department says it's going to be a strike force to probe the allegations that Director Tulsi Gabbard is making. You can put up that statement. This is a press statement from the Justice Department. And she said she was going to refer what she found to the Justice Department. I'm going to make this a little bigger here so I can read it. Justice Department announced the formation of a strike force to assess the evidence publicized by Tulsi Gabbard and investigate potential next legal steps which might stem from her disclosures. The department takes alleged weaponization of the intelligence community with the utmost seriousness. And then the Attorney General says pretty much the same thing. Now, I will say that I applaud this because I do believe that this should be dealt with not by press statements, but by the Justice Department if there are crimes that were committed. Now, Tulsi Gabbard said a pretty remarkable thing today about Secretary Clinton and her physical, mental state. Here's number 8.
Organizations in which State Department officials offered, in exchange for supporting Secretary Clinton's campaign for the presidency, significant increases in financing from the State Department. They also had documents that showed the patronage of the State Department to State Department employees who would go and support Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. There were high-level DNC emails that detailed evidence of Hillary's, quote, psycho-emotional problems, uncontrolled fits of anger, aggression, and cheerfulness, and that then Secretary Clinton was allegedly on a daily regimen of heavy tranquilizers. Then CIA Director Brennan and the intelligence community mischaracterized intelligence and relied on dubious substandard sources to create a contrived false narrative that Putin developed a quote-unquote clear preference for Trump.
Okay, now I probably should recuse myself from this portion of the program because I myself am on a daily regimen of heavy tranquilizers. So I'll power through. Now, interesting media story here. Here you have the Director of National Intelligence, former member of Congress, military veteran, trusted aide to the president, which Caroline Leavitt confirmed again today, making extraordinary allegations about Hillary Clinton. If you go on the website of the Washington Post or New York Times, at least last we checked, no reference to all of this. So let me play one more thing from Tulsi Gabbard, and then I want you guys to respond at great length to tell me what you think of this and understand it. Here is kind of the coda of what Tulsi Gabbard is saying. Extraordinary accusation, number 11, please.
Expressed intent and what followed afterward can only be described as a years-long coup and a treasonous conspiracy against the American people, our republic, and an attempt to undermine President Trump's administration.
All right, I don't like to turn everything into a media story, but if this were a Democratic administration saying these things about a Republican, the media would be asking a lot of questions to advance the story. Instead, many of the questions in the briefing seemed to be intended to knock down the story. Here is a clip that the White House posted of a CNN reporter in conflict with Tulsi Gabbard, number 13, please.
Multiple intelligence community assessments released in the months leading up to the November 2016 election concluded that Russia had neither the intent nor capability to impact the outcome of the U.S. election. On December 5th.
We've been listening there to the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, continuing on what has now been a multi-day effort, not only with public statements like this, but release of documents to attempt to back up the quite extreme allegation that President Obama is guilty of treason and that he worked in some sort of conspiracy with Hillary Clinton, etc., in the assessment by the intelligence community at the time that Russia interfered in the 2016 election.
Okay, Elizabeth, just let's start like this. Do you think the allegation that Barack Obama led a treasonous conspiracy is definitely true, definitely false, or don't know?
I'd throw another option in there, which would be up to everyone's interpretation.
Yeah.
I think if you were to ask really anyone about the events of the last 10 years, like since Donald Trump came onto the scene, you would get a different answer depending on who you were asking about most of the major stories that have happened over the last 10 years, right? Ever since Donald Trump came on the scene, really no one agrees on anything. I had that debate with someone today. We were talking about this and someone said, does the truth even matter anymore? Because even before Tulsi Gabbard got up there, before Caroline got up there, people have their own opinion about what they're saying before they say it, right? They either hate Donald Trump enough to ignore everything he says, or they believe that Barack Obama was a part of this to begin with. You know, maybe that's why so many people are confused about what the real allegation is today. It's because we've actually heard that allegation for quite some time. I don't think anyone that believed that the intelligence communities colluded against Donald Trump thought they did that without any kind of involvement from Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton. I don't think anyone really thought that. So I think it kind of depends who you ask. Kind of what you said is still true. The fact is that if this was the other way around, then it was a Democrat administration accusing this of a former Republican president, people would be reporting on it very differently and looking at the facts very differently. I don't expect that to happen at any point in time. At the same time, I would only hope that people can pretend to put their hatred of Donald Trump aside for the next few days and try to look at this openly and honestly. But the fact is, if you ask anyone what has happened, whether to do with the phony Russia collusion story, to do with the 2016 election, the 2020 election, the 24 election, anything that Donald Trump's been up against, people are going to tell you different stories, probably depending on who they voted for. And I think that's the major problem here. We're never going to get to the truth anymore because everyone has some kind of agenda.
All right, very well said, very profound, and I think true. Stephen, do you think it's possible that there was a conspiracy, and whether it violated the law or not, do you think there was a conspiracy to use intelligence information by the Obama administration to hurt Donald Trump? Yes, no, or maybe?
I think in terms of Obama's direct involvement with it, highly, highly unlikely. I think when you have these intelligence reports coming out from either administration and the media is reporting on it with their filter, it's important for consumers to always have take it with a grain of salt. I think, Mark, earlier you referenced some of the history behind Tulsi Gabbard and Hillary Clinton. This needs to be talked about a little bit more. And I should have mentioned this in my introduction too. I founded an organization of young elected officials called Future Caucus, cross-partisan, that Tulsi Gabbard was a member of in her first few terms in Congress. So I know her and I know what drives her in politics. And I remember the exact moment when she fell out of favor with the Democratic establishment and led by Hillary Clinton, among other Democratic elites, started calling her a Russian asset. And so her political transformation can't really be talked about without that moment, which was roughly 2015 going into 2016. Now, the other piece of context that's important with this story is that part of Tulsi Gabbard's core motivation in politics, I would argue to say her number one issue that she ran on for president that has moved her politically is ending what she calls regime change wars. And so the whole issue around Iran and how she was undercut by Trump just a few weeks ago about her assessment of Iran versus Trump's assessment to justify the bombings has to be taken into account into this story, because the question is, why now? Why now to be releasing this information, to be doing these press conferences, to be so public, to be focusing the MAGA attention squarely on President Obama, going back to 2016, which I've heard many Republicans say we shouldn't be relitigating old elections. Why doesn't that principle apply here? It's because we need to distract. And I think she's trying to distract from the Epstein story and regain her position in the MAGA world. So I just want to share those two pieces of context, Hillary Clinton and Iran, in this story.
It's certainly common for people in the press and for Democrats to say that this is intended to be a distraction. I don't pretend to know, but I do know these are extraordinary and serious allegations. And Elizabeth, what would the reason these wouldn't be covered, at least not currently, by the Washington Post and the New York Times? Just because they don't think Tulsi Gabbard's credible, because they don't like to cover allegations against Hillary Clinton? Why would you say those things aren't being covered in by a lot of places?
Yeah, I mean, anything Donald Trump says is going to be covered based on how the paper has previously covered him, right? They're not going to suddenly change their tune on Donald Trump or anything that comes out of his administration. I mean, we know how the Washington Post feels about President Trump. At the same time, I think you can kind of maybe report negatively on Hillary Clinton. I don't think anyone would dare report negatively on Barack Obama. I think there's a lot to the story. It is, we're talking about something that happened nearly 10 years ago, and we're talking about a very, very popular man in the Democrat Party. I don't see this being reported on fairly just because it's Donald Trump and Tulsi Gabbard, because it came out of nowhere. You could say a lot about the timing, but when the administration of the United States of America says something, you should take it seriously. Unfortunately, like I said, all of that went out the window in 2016 when Donald Trump won the election and everything changed. So I don't expect it to be, but I also don't think anyone else does, right? I don't think anyone's saying, oh my God, this is not true because the Washington Post isn't reporting on it. I mean, people know where to go to find the news they want to read.
Right. Where would you go? Elizabeth, quick, and then you, Stephen. Where would you go, Elizabeth, to read about this story and try to sort fact from fiction?
I mean, honestly, I would go to the Post. I would go to CNN. I want to read the people who I know disagree with me to see if they're saying anything that is helpful.
But is there a place you could go to say Tulsi Gabbard said all these things? Here's the best information about whether what she said is accurate or might be accurate. Is there a place you could go to read about it that you trust?
Yeah, I mean, most people unfortunately don't have the time, but I today sat back and read that report that Barack Obama's administration put out in 2017 because I
Yeah.
forgot what was in there. That's what I did. And I'm going to
Yeah.
read what Tulsi Gabbard puts out as well. And I think anyone that actually wants to take the time to learn the truth in 2025, unfortunately, has to do that.
Read the source documents. All right, Stephen, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, and Mark, you might be able to back me up on this. Working with a lot of journalists over the years, certainly over the last 10 years, I can't name a journalist who's in a private conversation with me said something positive about Tulsi Gabbard at a mainstream media outlet. And
Yeah.
so there's just going to be that inherent reflex when they receive this story from Tulsi. So I think that accounts for some of the media dynamics that you were both talking about. And just backing up what Elizabeth said in terms of how do you suss out a story like this, I think going to the original source materials as much as possible is really important, in addition to watching two-way, because this is where you get the real story, right?
Yeah, I hope so. But although, as I keep saying on this one, I'm so confused. I continue to be confused about what crime was committed. I get the prospect that there was a conspiracy to do political damage. And I think based on the record of some of these folks, you certainly can't rule it out. And you might even say it's more likely than not. But I'm still having trouble figuring out what crime was committed. I'm not an attorney, but I know a lot about the law, and so I'm confused. And I didn't hear. I mean, treason is a crime. It's in the Constitution, but I'm curious to see what this task force does, and I'm curious to see now that she says the Justice Department says there would be a task force. Typically, when there are criminal investigations, there's not a lot of public stuff. So I'll be curious to see if this kind of goes undercover, at least for a while. Either of you want to say anything else about this story?
Well, I'll just add that Obama has been talking about needing a more fighting stance for the Democratic Party, and the fact that they're now putting the spotlight on Obama and he's now starting to respond a little bit more. Obama is a political athlete in amongst a party that I think is trying to find really effective political athletes. So if you bring Obama onto the political stage, I actually think that's a positive for the Democratic Party.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe.
Yeah, it wasn't in the last election. That's the problem. So I think that's why he actually won't get involved, because it didn't work for him in the last election. And it's not a good look to prove to the world that you're actually no longer as popular as people once thought that you were.
All right. Again, if you want to be in on the conversation, please raise your hand. All right, let's talk about the Epstein's thing. And again, it has taken over. House is adjourned over it, and the president keeps having to talk about it. And there's stuff in the courts. It's really grown. And I know part of it is a small segment of the country is really determined to have transparency. And I've spoken about this before. It fits in the larger context of people not wanting elites to get away with anything, which I think is a great development. And the president has, been not 100% consistent on his posture on disclosure. So let me just run through the major headlines, and then we'll talk about it. Number one, the Wall Street Journal reported today that Pam Bondi told the president his name appears in the files, along with many other people. And that the reason that Bondi also told the president that the reason Justice hasn't released more documents is because there's child pornography and a need to protect the names of victims. Of course, you could redact things, but the president was asked not that long ago whether Bondi had told him that his name appears in the files, and he didn't say yes. His answers, I'd say, if you want to be charitable, is kind of evasive. So this story is getting a lot of attention. That reporting's been matched by at least the New York Times, perhaps others. So the president's name appears in there, and he was told that. I continue to believe he should recuse himself from the whole thing because he's good friends with Jeffrey. It was good friends with Jeffrey Epstein. I just find it mind-boggling that he's still involved. All right, number two, there's two courts, one in the Northeast, I think New York, one in Florida, that have been asked by the administration to put out some of the grand jury material, and the Florida court is declining to do that. And no surprise, because again, grand jury material is not normally released, and the reason the administration gave to say the normal rule should be suspended was not persuasive for this judge, and it's not persuasive to me. I understand the need for transparency, but there's a reason why we keep grand jury material secret. That's the norm. Number three, Mr. Comer of Kentucky, the Republican congressman, has issued a subpoena for Ghislaine Maxwell, and it says that if he does get a time with her, it'll be in the court, it'll be in the prison in Florida. They're not going to fly her up to Washington, at least not initially. Number four, Democrats accusing the president of a cover-up in the wake of that Wall Street Journal story when he said he suggested he hadn't been told that his name appears, and then Nancy Pelosi, who's become I would say maybe a born again believer in full transparency, tweeted that the president should release the files. We'll see what happens there. So lots to talk about, and clearly the story is not going to die out as the president wants it to. Elizabeth, I'll start with you. Has the president's conduct during the course of this demand for disclosure that's bipartisan, and of course a lot of your friends in the influencer community has called that, does his conduct make you suspicious about why he's not for disclosure, or is there some other reason that's wouldn't be suspicion causing that he wouldn't want to be for more disclosure?
Honestly, no, I don't think suspicion is what comes to mind. I think a lot of people are genuinely confused. I think for many, this was actually a top issue, whereas for Donald Trump, I don't think when he went into the White House and kind of laid out his goals for the, year one, let's say, this was up there. He talked about the Epstein files and the campaign trail a lot less than most other people, and I think there was a little bit of a separation when he went in from what he was expecting to do and expecting to talk about to what a lot of people in that core influencer community were expecting to come out of the White House. I think in general, the only real mistake was, that 5 minutes, whatever it was, of Pam Bondi saying, I have the list on my desk. I don't know if she misspoke that day. I don't know if she misspoke later on. I still don't know what happened. No one does. I think that was the real mistake. And that day, if she realized that she misspoke, she should have come out and said, actually, what I meant was I have the information on my desk. I think that was the real problem, and that's what should be answered for. I've said from day one, the story is not going to die. And if it doesn't die, Donald Trump is going to, allow more information to be released just because he knows he answers to the American people. And he's always been very, very much on the pulse, I'd say, of what people are thinking, especially about his own time and power. So I think for me, I've just been confused because so much has happened at the same time. There was the flooding in Texas, which kind of happened when this story kind of exploded, whether it was what happened with Iran. And I think for him, it's about wanting to talk about his own victories and not these other things more so than anything suspicious. I'm curious what happens next. I don't think anyone expected to be advocating for Ghislaine Maxwell to go out and, give us her new testimony. So I'm excited to see what happens there. But I think for him, it's mostly just about this not being the goal of his administration, not being what he wants people to talk about, to think about when he is seeing so many of his own victories kind of being ignored at the same time.
Okay, so let me just press you, Elizabeth, and Stephen, I want to ask you something similar. On the side of the ledger of disclosure is many of the president's allies, Laura Loomer and Steve Bannon and Charlie Kirk, they want disclosure, right? That'd be the pro-disclosure side. The president believes in transparency, he says all the time. And if he wants the story to go away, it's the oldest rule in both PR and vomiting. Get it all out. You have some bad salmon in there. Don't throw up some of it. Get it all out. So that'd be on the disclosure side. What's on the non-disclosure side? Now, you could say he doesn't want to be talking about this, but any PR executive or advisor could tell him, if you don't want to talk about this, you should get the stuff out because this is going away. So what would be on the ledger, on the side of the ledger, saying the president should be opposed to disclosure, which he has largely been, except for fits and starts? What's on that side of the ledger?
Yeah, I mean, I like that you said, any PR expert would tell him otherwise. I don't know if Donald Trump really listens to any PR experts. He's been his own PR since day one, and it's worked for him. That's the real problem. Since 2016, everyone left and right has had an opinion on how he should run his campaign or run his reelection campaign or whatever it was, and he's never listened. And every time people told him that he was wrong and he was going to lose his base and it wasn't going to work, that was proven to be false, and he ended up on the right side and ended up ending up reelected or in the Oval Office with more support than ever before. So I don't know if he's big on listening to PR experts. I think in his brain, he's very focused on what he's doing, and he believes the base will follow, right? I really don't think he was as in tune to that online influencer community as people think that he was. I don't think that was his focus. And
but let me ask you again. Sorry to interrupt, but what's on the other side of the ledger? Why if the president was confiding you and telling you every thought about this, what would be on the side of the ledger that says don't disclose?
Look, I can only imagine, like you mentioned, some folks that want all the information out, and a lot of them are my friends and people I respect a lot. I can only imagine there's some kind of information that you would get once you actually became an admin official that I don't have, right? That maybe Steve Bannon doesn't have, and Laura Loomer doesn't have, and Charlie Kirk doesn't have. He must know something that we don't know, and I'm not going to sit here and assume I'm the smartest person in the room, or I know everything that's going on there, or anything that's in these files when I don't, right? I think I don't want to jump to suspicion, because too many people do that. I don't want to jump on the Democrat side either, because I know that's just because they're salivating at the idea of Donald Trump losing any members of his base, which he's not. So for me, I think it's letting time take its course, seeing what's going to happen, not assuming anything negative, because I don't actually think the story is as big as it is. I just think when you work for the federal government, things end up a little bit different than they might be on Twitter, when you assume that you're going to get some kind of information that maybe you're unable to get for a whole boatload of reasons that many of us on the outside will never understand.
Okay, very good caution. I tell people the same thing all the time. Don't assume you know what they know, and that there might be more going on. Steven, where do you think we're headed next on this? Do you think there's this story is just going to continue to burn bright, or not, and why?
I think the way it will burn will evolve over time. What's happening right now is that Congressman Ro Khanna and Congressman Thomas Massie have a bill to force disclosure that has enough votes to actually pass the U.S. Congress, and it forced the Congress to actually adjourn ahead of time. So that means it's getting punted likely to September. We'll see what new information comes out between now and then, but this is going to definitely be an issue in the fall. And what's going to happen in the meantime is the online influencer community is going to continue thinking about, talking about, imagining what the reasons are for the Trump administration to continue blocking the disclosure here. It's worth mentioning, by the way, a couple people on that bill in Congress include Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tim Burchett, like a lot of key people in the MAGA world. So I think it's important for people to realize that to analyze this from a traditional Washington political kind of viewpoint is probably not the right way to do it. This is a cultural issue. It's the kind of story that hits the emotional buttons that are part of the DNA of the populism you see, particularly on the right, but also to some degree on the left. So it's just going to continue festering until somehow there's more disclosure. I mean, over time, it might even become, I mean, I'm not saying it's like this yet, but over time, it may become sort of like this JFK assassination style conspiracy theory that just festers for years and decades and decades.
All right, we're going to your questions now. Amongst my guests on Next Up tomorrow, my show on the Megyn Kelly Network, will be Congressman Ro Khanna, and as Steven suggested, he's co-sponsoring this bill, not just with Mr. Massie of Kentucky, but with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Congressman Boebert and others. And so there is this populist left-right, call it a strange bedfellows alliance or whatever you want to call it, but it's part of why the story is interesting and complicated in terms of the politics. So, all right, let's go to your questions now for our two great guests. Ask what you'd like, Joe, after you tell folks who don't know where you are and what's on your mind for Elizabeth and Steven. And if you need good restaurant recommendations in either Milwaukee or Gotham City, you may want to begin there.
Well, thanks. I'm surprised. I'm from Central New Jersey. I've been on before. I'm surprised there are not more hands raised, because these are really interesting topics, right? We've talked about Epstein quite a bit. And, we've also talked about Tulsi Gabbard and the revelations. I really do think, well, a couple things. Mark, I think you said and continue to say that you're not quite sure where this goes, right? And Megyn Kelly, I think, was in the same boat when you guys were on that panel together, where she wasn't really quite sure where this goes. But I think having, if you wanted to get a good guest, Matt Taibbi would be a good guest. I think that's who kind of convinced Megyn Kelly that there's something there. I also saw a brief Victor David Hanson summary, and I thought he did a good job of explaining it as well. But I will say, with all of that, I don't, as profound as this story may be, I don't think it's going anywhere. I really just think there's not going to be the pressure of the media, the dominant media. Barack Obama may not be popular with the Democrat elite anymore, but I still think he's popular with the Democratic press. And I do think that's, that doesn't make the difference.
Okay, Joe, stop there. Let's let folks comment. Steven, thoughts on what Joe said?
Well, definitely on the last part, what he said, Obama definitely, and his key aides definitely have influence on mainstream media. But I agree that this story is just going to continue, and I think ultimately the Trump administration will have to decide what they're going to do about it. It may just end up being one of those we agree to disagree with our base, and the Megyn Kellys and the Charlie Kirks decide to move on. We've already saw last week what happened with Charlie Kirk publicly saying that he was ready to move on. And, I think, Elizabeth, you referenced this earlier. I'm not sure that the MAGA base, even though they're disagreed on this topic, I don't think that Trump is bleeding too much support from that core MAGA base. So it might just be that this continues to be conspiracy theory central online and just festers, and we never get answers about it.
Elizabeth.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree. I think on Epstein, we will get some answers just because I know how powerful the people are when they especially come together, right? We're seeing a lot on the left and the right. On the Obama stuff, like I said, I don't think anyone in the media, you said it correctly for sure, I don't think anyone in the media is going to ever come after Barack Obama. I don't see that happening. He has way too much influence. And I think we can all, I mean, most people can agree that there was some kind of an effort, at minimum, to delegitimize Donald Trump as a candidate and then as an elected president after 2016. And I know Barack Obama was a part of that. We can debate how much he was a part of that. I don't think anyone's facing real charges here. I don't know where this is going to go. But I think, again, it kind of depends who you ask. But most people that I know had already been agreeing on this for quite some time.
Yeah,
Okay.
100% agree.
Joe, before you get to your second point, I'll just respond. People have been suggesting to me for about a week that we should have Mike Taibbi on the show, and sometimes people say, "Well, you should have Jesus on." Not every booking is possible, but I appreciate the suggestion. But we're not always able to book the people you'd like. Joe, did you have a second point you wanted to make?
No, not really. I do
Okay.
think on the Epstein, I'll just say on the Epstein thing, there will be continued pressure, but there's a lot of time between now and September. Something could easily wipe this.
Yeah.
Some big news could easily put this to the side. We've seen that over and over again. But transparency is always best, and that's what we should aim for. I think everybody can agree.
All right, Joe, grateful to you. Thanks for coming on. All right, let's go to Mr. Holliday. Chris, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are. And question for Elizabeth and Steven. After you unmute, there you go.
Hey, I'm from Kentucky, and I was just wondering, it's not really related to the Epstein story, but maybe they would care to comment on this. I thought about this at the time that it happened. So this whole Joe Biden debate thing, and then this week, the interview with Hunter is what brought this back to my mind. Do y'all think there's any possibility whatsoever, maybe from internal polling or from fundraising numbers, do you think he threw that debate on purpose? Do you think maybe he saw the trends and just knew that he couldn't win? And I mean, now they're talking about this, Hunter Biden said he was on Ambien, which seems like the worst advice in the world to give an 80-year-old candidate right before a big debate. And he had done the State of the Union and had no issues just earlier that year. So do y'all think there's any possibility that he just saw trends and thought, maybe I need to make myself an exit?
0% chance for me. And I'll tell you, I said during the whole campaign, Joe Biden's cognitive decline was not as bad as Republicans said, and significantly more than the Democrats said. And he had good nights and bad nights. And they thought he'd have a good night on the debate. He had a good night at State of the Union, but he didn't. And I think whether it's because he took drugs or was exhausted or just the bad luck of the draw, two things are, I feel as strongly as I do about everything. I try to have an open mind. He did not throw the debate, and the people who had him debate did not do it because they knew he'd do bad and they'd have time to get him off the ticket. The people who had him debate looked at the data and said, we have to change the dynamic. We can't win the election unless we change the dynamic. You have to get on the stage and win. They rolled the dice and they lost. Steven, thoughts on the prospect that Joe Biden purposely tanked himself?
I agree with Mark. There's no chance of it, and it had been bubbling for a long time. I was in a relatively small room with Joe Biden in February of the election year, and it was clear to me then that this is not a candidate who's ready for prime time and ready to actually do what would become a grueling presidential campaign. And so for me, it was just a matter of time when the truth would come out into the public, and the debate was the moment that happened. And as Mark referenced, the campaign was trying to change the dynamic. RFK Jr. was quite ascendant at that time as well. They wanted to just say, these are the two candidates. That's why they rejected the precedent of working with the Commission on Presidential Debates, created this early debate in June, which both of those things I think were a huge mistake on their part. And I just think, Chris, the truth came out in the debate, and it was long overdue.
Yeah. Elizabeth, if Joe Biden was having a good day, and I don't know if he still has them, but if he were, and you could interview him, what are one or two questions you'd ask him if you were going to interview Joe Biden? Lucid.
So good. No, actually, I would die for that opportunity. I would say, who turned on you first? That's the main question, because he's been around for so long. A lot of those aides were around for a very long time, and they were like family to him. I'd be really curious who turned first. I think that would be number one. And I mean, number two, do you think you could have won? Because I mean, it kind of answers your question as well. But I think he really, from what I was told, he actually, when he was having a good day, he believed that he could have beaten Donald Trump, and he was the man for the job and was very confident. I don't think he threw the debate. I don't think he's that good of an actor, but I really think he believed that he could have won. And I do wonder to this day, based on how much confidence he had in himself and how angry he is about everything that happened after the fact, if he believes if he had stayed on or if that debate had gone a different direction, if he could have beaten Donald Trump.
Yeah, great. Two great options. Chris, thank you. I'll tell you, this is another underreported thing. And if I ever get around to writing a book about the campaign, I will report the heck out of this. Here's something Joe Biden was right, a series of things Joe Biden was right about. That if Kamala Harris, that if he stepped down, Kamala Harris would be the nominee, and that she had no chance to beat Donald Trump. And now it got more and more true. In other words, if he'd stepped down right after the midterms, maybe she wouldn't have been the nominee. But every day he waited, he foresaw what would happen, that you couldn't take the nomination away from her for a variety of reasons. Black woman, Democratic vice president, you're just not going to take the nomination. And when Pelosi and others forced Joe Biden off the ticket, they didn't want Kamala Harris to be the nominee. They had various options of what they wanted. Some wanted Governor Shapiro. But they also saw quickly no one wanted to run against her. It was not so necessarily so much about the voters as it was about white male governor of Pennsylvania. Just he didn't want to roll the dice and try to beat Kamala Harris, because remember, the nominating electorate was the delegates who were Biden-Harris delegates. And you look at the profile of DNC delegates, there's no way anybody was going to beat her. And Joe Biden, I think correctly, and I think not out of pique or frustration or anger, just he understood politics. He didn't think Joe Biden, Kamala Harris was going to win a general election, and therefore he didn't want to step down. And I don't think he's right about his own chances, but I think he was right about hers, and that was a big part of his motivation. Matthew, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Tell Stephen, Elizabeth, and everybody else where you are and what's on your mind for them.
Hi, Mark. Thank you for having me. I'm from Manhattan, and Mark, your advertisement for Elizabeth on this morning's program was so tantalizing and so compelling. I felt compelled to join you today.
What did I say? What did I say about her? What did I say? Oh, I read her Twitter.
You read her Twitter.
Elizabeth, you know what I did? Your Twitter bio is so interesting. I quizzed my colleague. I read some real things and some fake things and asked him which ones are real and which ones are fake. And I have to say, your real ones are interesting. My fake ones are pretty good too.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Matthew, go ahead with your question.
So I wanted to talk about the mayor's race in New York City, and I was very curious to hear what Elizabeth thought about the mayor's race. I don't know, for many of us here in Manhattan, look, you know, the greatness of America for people who are patriotic and Americans, and both are Jewish, is that it's been an exceptional country for our people in its history, because there's never been any form of political or government discrimination. And in fact, no executive has ever been elected to power who has been flagrantly anti-Semitic. There have been a couple of legislators over time who have fulfilled that category: Burton Wheeler, Senator Bilbo, we can all name them. But I am terrified about Zoran Mamdani becoming mayor. And one of the things that I don't understand, I was hoping that you could enlighten me about, is there's a great deal of evidence that in his public comments and his praise of the Holy Land Foundation, the fact that he led SJP at Bowdoin College, to actually link him to those organizations that have been investigated for their ties to Hamas. Nobody in the press ever talks about it. They're always focused on, can you please denounce people who say globalize the Intifada? But they're not looking behind the scenes. And I'm wondering whether or not, first of all, what your thoughts are about the mayoral election. And secondly, whether or not, you have similar kinds of worries that I do, and whether or not you know anyone who's investigating those ties.
Okay, Matthew, thank you. First of all, Elizabeth, are you a New York voter?
I'm not. No, I moved after 2020 to make Donald Trump president. I moved to Florida, and now I literally actually was deciding. We left it up to this race, right? So my family is kind of waiting to see what happens in this mayoral race to see if we come back home. So I definitely share.
If you were a New York voter, who would you vote for in this general election?
I mean, I'm praying that we only have one choice, because if we have all three against Mamdani, it doesn't matter who I vote for. So I'm going to assume Andrew Cuomo or Mayor Adams are the only options. I'm going to hope it's just one of them on that ballot, or it really doesn't matter and I'm never coming home.
What if you could make any of the four candidates mayor, just unilaterally? Which of the four do you think you'd make mayor?
Probably Cuomo at this point. I mean, I never thought I'd be a Cuomo supporter, but I mean, at this point, he's the best we have. I think Mayor Adams has, really not lived up to anyone's expectations. I think he's polling fourth. He's polling lower than Sliwa, so I don't really understand the effort behind him versus Cuomo. But regardless, I share your concerns. I love New York. It is my home. More than anything, probably as a Jewish American, it's my home. Both my parents were Jewish refugees who fled the Soviet Union, came to New York, and were welcomed with open arms, and went from having, really $90 in their pockets to building the greatest life for me that I could have ever asked for. So I've loved the United States, and I've loved New York, and I've been so grateful, like you said, as a Jew, not having to kind of feel any of the prejudices that my parents warned me about that exist around the world, and now I'm feeling them, unfortunately. So yes, I'm scared. I'm very hopeful that people come together behind one candidate and realize that Mamdani is not an answer, not because he's anti-Semitic, but because he is anti-American. All of his views stand against what we value as Americans. Anti-Semitism just kind of falls right in there with socialism and communism and a bunch of other things that we should be very fearful of. So I'm very scared when it comes to talking about his ties to a lot of these dangerous groups. I don't know how much it matters. I don't know how much people pay attention. I mean, we have members of Congress who are very much tied to a lot of groups that are currently being investigated or have been investigated for supporting terrorism. And no one talks about it, and no one cares, and we're called Islamophobic for bringing it up. So I really don't know. I wish more people open their minds and hearts to all of this, but I don't even think any of that matters when the guy is a proud socialist, and New York City is not going to survive under any of his policies.
I want to ask Elizabeth one more question, then Stephen, I want to hear your overview of the mayor's race. If you were the strategist spokesperson for an anti-Mamdani super PAC, Mamdani super PAC, and you had, $50 million, what would your message be? What would you do to try to defeat him?
To defeat Mamdani, I would have picked a better candidate to begin with.
All right. There's no time machine in my hypothetical. You start tomorrow. You start Thursday the 24th. $50 million. You're the chief strategist for the super PAC. What would you spend your money on? What would the message be if your goal was to keep him from being mayor? Whoever ended up being mayor, would be part of your calculation. But what would your message be? Would you say socialist? Would you say anti-Semite? Would you say unqualified?
Definitely socialist. I think you would find there's a few clips that are floating around the internet with some of his scariest views. You would find those. And you would knock on every single door of voters that are registered and haven't voted, or who are unregistered and still have time to register, and make sure that they know what is on the ballot. Because people scream anti-Semitism left and right. It doesn't really work, especially in New York, where most people that are Jewish or have Jewish friends or care about the issue have already made up their mind. You're going to convince people when you talk about government-run grocery stores seizing private property. That's how you're going to convince people. So I would make sure everyone knows where this man actually stands and what he has said in the past that hasn't come up in a little bit because people aren't doing their research, but those clips do exist.
Now, you've never had a slice of pepperoni pizza, but how much would a cheese slice cost under Mamdani, do you think? Would it go up? Would it go up?
It would probably go up.
Would they be
You'd have
free?
to sell your soul in the process, so who the hell knows? But I don't want to think about it. I'm hoping it doesn't happen.
Okay.
Really am.
Stephen, what's your analysis of the race? And we did a poll with our partners at WIC that came out yesterday. I think it's the best poll anybody's done, thanks to WIC, on the mayor's race. And it shows Mamdani in a very strong position. I think if you read our poll carefully, you see something's going to have to change for him to lose. So how do you see, not the race currently, but how do you see projecting forward between now and election day? What are the things you think could change or are likely to change?
Well, I think, first of all, he's, I believe, in Uganda for his own wedding. So once he gets back, I think he needs to continue building the drumbeat around his campaign and continue what he's been doing well, which is showing up authentically through these social media videos and showing him listening to voters. I think that theme of listening is really important. And I think we've seen his support either, gradually rise as Cuomo comes out with one of the least inspiring videos I've seen from any candidate. And as we talked about earlier, Adams is now probably in fourth place in the race. So I think there's probably about a 70% chance now that Mamdani wins. He can't take any of this for granted. He has to definitely keep working at it and showing up, which I'm sure he will once he gets back to New York. But yeah, I think the candidate selection for the anti-Mamdani voters are really going to be left wanting. A lot of my New York friends are reaching out saying they don't know really who to vote for because they don't like any of the candidates.
And tell people, who would you vote for if you were a New York voter?
That's tough. I mean, I will never be a New York voter in my life. I'd have to think about that because I really do think, on one hand, Mamdani has spoken to some really important issues, talks about dignity. I like how he's actually running his campaign from a practitioner standpoint. It's very much mimics the model of politics that I believe in. But on the other hand, I think he should be a lot stronger in supporting the Jewish community and combating anti-Semitism. He's done things in his past that I don't necessarily agree with. So I think it'd be pretty tough.
All right, Matthew, thank you. Stephen, never say never. If Curtis Lee offered to make you a deputy mayor, you might move here, right?
I probably,
Right.
That's still a no. That's still
right.
good.
Stephen, am I remember correctly that you've written a book?
I've co-authored a book on JFK.
And Elizabeth, have you written a book?
I have a few years ago, yes.
Okay. If you guys don't mind sharing, how much of an advance did you get for your book, Stephen? How much did you get? Do you remember?
That was a volunteer project. It was part of a collaborative effort.
So zero. Elizabeth, how much did you have advanced?
Went to a good
Also zero.
Also
I made
zero.
a very different deal
Yeah.
for more royalties after the book came out.
Okay, that's a model that works for some.
Yeah.
What was your book about, Elizabeth?
So it's called Finding My Place, Making My Parents' American Dream Come True, and that kind of tells it all. I wanted to tell my parents' story and why I am so, proud to be American and why all of these issues, like we're talking about now with socialism and a lot of things, unfortunately, that people my age and younger really, really think are the answers to all of our problems are actually not, and they're the things that many Americans actually ran away from. So I just wanted to tell my story and let people understand where this New York City girl who ended up being, the face of Trump for a lot of things, where she came from and how all that happened.
Okay, the reason I ask is during our program, the Wall Street Journal broke a story. They say Joe Biden has just signed a book deal with the publisher Hachette, and they say what his book advance is. Let's end with a quiz. Elizabeth, what do you think Joe Biden reportedly got for his book? How much would you say?
20 million.
20 million. Okay, Stephen.
I'm gonna go with 12 or 13 million.
All right, Stephen's closer. 10 million. The Wall Street Journal says 10 million. Seems like a lot to me. Unless he really writes the truth. Like if Hunter's podcast was the basically a summary or a mirroring the book proposal, could be a pretty good book, if he does that. Very grateful to you both for joining. Stephen coming back and Elizabeth for the first time, and I hope you'll both come back regularly. And I kind of like you as a pair, so maybe you'll come back on a regular basis together, and we'll Elizabeth and I will continue to try to sell you, Stephen, on the virtues of Gotham City.
Well, I'll be there very soon next week.
Okay.
So I welcome your.
You know what? Maybe we'll spend some time with a realtor. Just so you can look. Elizabeth, thank you. Stephen, thank you. Grateful to you both.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Enjoy the reserve cut.
I will. I'm looking forward to it. I've been there before as a credible steak, as I said. All right. Right now, turn right over to watch Bridget Bridget Fedesi and her program tonight. Their focus is on crypto, right? Am I right? Is that what it is? Crypto tonight? Money. It's
AI,
money.
AI.
AI. I knew
Artificial
it was that was
intelligence.
last week. Artificial intelligence. So Bridget's on right now. Go watch that. If you haven't watched Meghan McCain's interview with Giselle Fetterman, please watch that. And I will be back in a few hours with the morning meeting with Sean and Dan. And I can tell you, Sean and Dan, based on our text chain, are fired up and ready to go to talk about Tulsi Gabbard and talk about Epstein. So it's going to be the functional equivalent of Rock'em Sock'em Robot. So I'll see you at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Thanks to our guests. Thanks to you. Great questions. And we'll see you at 9 a.m. Have a good night.